I never thought my big break as an artist would come from my own sister's cruelty. My name is Olivia Hayes, and at 32, I've spent the last decade pursuing my passion for painting, while barely making rent on my tiny New York studio apartment. The irony isn't lost on me that my sister Vanessa, the successful one in our family, would inadvertently launch my career through what was supposed to be my ultimate humiliation. When her invitation arrived for the housewarming party at her new Upper East Side apartment, I felt that familiar mixture of hope and dread. Vanessa had always been the golden child, the one who followed our parents' practical advice into a lucrative interior design career, while I was the dreamer who chose art school and a life of uncertainty. But despite our strained relationship, I still harbored this childish fantasy that one day she'd see my work and finally understand why I chose this path. That's why I decided to bring my latest painting as a housewarming gift, a piece I'd spent months perfecting, an abstract cityscape that represented my new artistic direction. It was the best work I'd ever created, with layers of deep blues and vibrant oranges, capturing the chaotic energy of New York at twilight. As I carefully wrapped the canvas that evening, I imagined Vanessa's face lighting up when she saw it, perhaps even offering to hang it in her new place. I pictured her wealthy friends asking about the artist, and Vanessa proudly introducing me. God, I was so naive. The taxi dropped me off in front of her building, a pre-war masterpiece with a uniformed doorman who eyed my package suspiciously. I clutched my painting tighter, suddenly aware of how out of place I already felt. The elevator ride to the 12th floor gave me just enough time to smooth my thrift store dress and take a deep breath. This time will be different, I whispered to myself as I pressed the doorbell, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter seeping through the door. I had no idea that by tomorrow morning, everything would change in ways I couldn't have imagined, and that the painting tucked under my arm would be worth more than all of Vanessa's designer furniture combined. The door swung open to reveal Vanessa in a sleek black cocktail dress, her perfect blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the light as she gave me an air kiss inches from my cheek. "Olivia, you made it," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, quickly scanning my outfit with a barely concealed wince. Come in, come in." "Oh, is that another one of your paintings?" The slight pause before paintings felt deliberate, as if she wasn't quite sure how to categorize my work. I nodded and handed it to her, watching as she unwrapped it with the enthusiasm of someone opening a utility bill. "It's an abstract cityscape. I thought it might work in your new place," I explained, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "How interesting," she replied, immediately passing it to a nearby server. "Just put this with the other gifts, Marco." I watched helplessly as my carefully created piece was carried away and placed unceremoniously in a corner, while elaborately wrapped packages from luxury brands were displayed prominently on a table. The apartment was stunning, I had to admit, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a perfect view of Central Park, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year, and walls adorned with artwork that I recognized from well-known galleries. Guests in designer clothes clustered in groups, champagne flutes in hand, their conversation a sophisticated hum, punctuated by occasional laughter. "Let me introduce you," Vanessa said, guiding me toward a couple near the window. But before we reached them, she was intercepted by someone calling her name. "Oh, Richard, so glad you could make it," she exclaimed, immediately changing course and leaving me standing awkwardly alone. I made my way to the bar, ordering a glass of wine to steady my nerves, and found myself standing next to an older gentleman with kind eyes and a British accent. "Quite the soiree, isn't it?" he commented with a slight smile that suggested he found it all a bit much too. "I'm James." I introduced myself, grateful for the friendly face, and was surprised when he asked what I did. When I mentioned I was an artist, his interest seemed genuine. "What medium do you work in?" he asked, and for a few minutes, I found myself engrossed in a conversation about technique and inspiration. Just as I was describing my process, Vanessa appeared, linking her arm through James's. "I see you've met my little sister," she said with a laugh. "James is one of my most important clients, Liv. He has quite the collection of real art." The emphasis on real wasn't subtle. Before I could respond, she was pulling him away. "You simply must meet the Andersons. They just acquired the most amazing piece from that gallery in Chelsea." Her voice trailed off as they disappeared into the crowd. Throughout the evening, this scene repeated itself in various forms. Whenever I managed to engage in conversation with someone who showed interest in my work, Vanessa would materialize to redirect them. I began to notice my painting being moved farther and farther from the main gathering, eventually ending up near the coat closet. The memory of our childhood bedroom surfaced unexpectedly. The clear division between her immaculate half and my creative chaos. How she would complain to our parents about my mess spreading onto her side. How they would always take her side. "Your sister is more organized," they'd say. "You could learn from her example." Even then, she had a way of making my passion seem like a character flaw. I pushed the memory away and tried to maintain a positive attitude, but with each passing hour, the weight of feeling unwelcome grew heavier. Still, I held on to a sliver of hope that somehow tonight could be a turning point for us. The evening progressed like a slow-motion car crash that I could see coming, but was powerless to stop. As more champagne flowed, Vanessa's comments about my career became increasingly barbed. "Olivia still believes she'll be discovered one day," she announced to a group of her friends as I approached, her tone suggesting she was discussing a child's belief in Santa Claus. "How many gallery rejections has it been this year, Liv? 12? 15? I forced a smile, feeling my cheeks burn. "Just keeping track of my persistence," I countered, trying to sound lighthearted. A woman in the group gave me a sympathetic look that somehow hurt more than Vanessa's directness. "Well, persistence is admirable," she offered kindly, but Vanessa wasn't finished. "I keep telling her there's good money in commercial art. Even greeting cards need designers, right?" The group laughed, and I took a large sip of wine to hide my expression. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment of solitude. In the hallway, I overheard Vanessa's voice, coming from the kitchen. "I'm supporting her hobby as much as I can, but at some point, she needs to grow up and get a real job," she was saying to someone. "Our parents helped her through art school, which was already more than it was worth. Now they're asking me to encourage her talent. As if I don't have my own career to focus on." The casual dismissal of everything I'd worked for felt like a physical blow. I'd been working 2 part-time jobs to support my art, never asking our parents for money since graduation. A fact Vanessa knew perfectly well. The mention of our parents brought back a flood of memories. The way they'd attended every one of all Vanessa's design showcases, but had always found excuses to miss my art exhibitions. How they'd framed her awards and certificates, while my paintings were relegated to the basement storage. The constant suggestions that I should follow in my sister's practical footsteps. I'd always attributed their behavior to genuine concern for my financial stability, but standing in my sister's expensive apartment, listening to her misrepresent my life to make herself look better, I wondered if they'd simply valued Vanessa's choices more than mine all along. When I returned to the party, I noticed my painting had been moved yet again, this time to a spot near the drink station. James, the British gentleman, caught my eye from across the room and started making his way toward me, but Vanessa intercepted him once more, this time introducing him to a famous architect whose name I recognized from magazines. I watched as she placed a proprietary hand on his arm, glancing in my direction, as if to make sure I was witnessing my exclusion. It wasn't the first time Vanessa had deliberately undermined me. There was the high school art competition, where she'd accidentally spilled coffee on my entry the night before submission. The time she told my first serious boyfriend about my unstable career prospects, until he started questioning our future together. The family gatherings where she'd redirect conversations whenever anyone showed interest in my work. But this seemed different, more pointed, as if my presence in her carefully curated world was a personal affront she needed to correct. As the evening wore on, I found myself increasingly questioning why I'd come at all. What had I expected to happen? That suddenly, after 32 years, Vanessa would transform into a supportive sister that her wealthy friends would discover my genius and change my life. Standing alone by the window, watching the glittering city lights that had inspired my painting, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Was I foolish to think my art would ever be good enough for this crowd? I whispered to myself, the voice in my head sounding suspiciously like Vanessa's. For a moment, I considered slipping out unnoticed, retrieving my painting, and disappearing back to my small studio apartment, where at least my art was respected, if only by me. But something kept me rooted in place. Some stubborn part of me, unwilling to give Vanessa the satisfaction of driving me away. "Everyone, dinner is served!" Vanessa's voice rang out above the party chatter, and the guests began migrating toward the dining area. I followed the crowd into a stunning room, dominated by an enormous glass table that could easily seat 20 people. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over place settings that belonged in a design magazine, with name cards in elegant calligraphy directing guests to their assigned seats. I scanned the table, looking for my name, only to find it at the very end, next to the kitchen door, and far from any of the interesting guests I'd met. James was seated near Vanessa at the opposite end, engaged in conversation with a well-known gallery owner, whose rejection letter was still pinned to my studio bulletin board. As everyone settled in, Vanessa remained standing, raising her glass for a toast. "Welcome to my new home," she began, gesturing around the space. "As some of you know, I've spent the last 6 months bringing this vision to life, and I'm thrilled to finally share it with the people who matter most." Her gaze swept across the table, deliberately skipping over me. Each piece in this apartment was carefully selected to create the perfect harmony of form and function. I noticed my painting had been moved yet again, this time positioned precariously near the drink station with no protection, while expensive artwork on the walls was perfectly lit and prominently featured. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of seafood that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. As conversation flowed around me, I felt increasingly invisible, responding to occasional polite questions from my neighbors, but mostly pushing food around my plate. Midway through the main course, a minor commotion erupted near the drink station when someone accidentally bumped into the counter, sending a splash of red wine dangerously close to my canvas. "Oh no!" the woman exclaimed, reaching for a napkin. "I almost ruined that painting." Vanessa's laugh carried down the table. "It's just one of Olivia's paintings. Don't worry about it," she called out dismissively, not like it's a valuable piece or anything. The casual cruelty of her words silenced the immediate area around her, with several guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. I gripped my fork tighter, feeling the heat of embarrassment crawl up my neck. Before I could respond, Vanessa stood up and walked over to my painting, picking it up with none of the care it deserved. "Actually, this gives me a chance to show you all something," she announced, holding my work aloft like a demonstration prop. "When you're selecting art for your home, you want to consider placement very carefully. Something like this," she gestured dismissively at my cityscape, "is too busy for most sophisticated spaces. The colors are a bit amateur, don't you think?" She looked around for agreement, and to my horror, several of her friends nodded along. "The composition lacks focus," offered one man who had introduced himself earlier as an art collector, "and the brushwork is inconsistent," added a woman wearing more jewelry than I could afford in a lifetime. Each comment felt like a physical blow, reminding me of childhood art classes, where my work was displayed alongside Vanessa's perfect still lifes. While teachers praised her technical precision, they often struggled to find kind words for my more emotional, abstract approach. "You have unique ideas, Olivia," they would say carefully, "but you need to master the basics first." I'd eventually learn to embrace my distinctive style, but sitting in Vanessa's dining room, I was transported back to that feeling of inadequacy. The memory of my 12th birthday surfaced without warning, when I'd spent weeks creating a series of small paintings to display at my party. The morning of the celebration, I discovered them torn and crumpled in the trash. Vanessa had claimed our dog destroyed them, but the precise tears told a different story. Our parents had sided with her, as usual, and my birthday became about replacing my ruined hobby things, rather than celebrating my art. Now 20 years later, nothing had changed. Vanessa continued her impromptu design lecture, walking around the room with my painting, pointing out how it clashed with various elements of her decor. The audience was growing visibly uncomfortable, but no one intervened. Even James, who had seemed genuinely interested in my work earlier, was watching with a furrowed brow, but remained silent. I felt paralyzed, torn between the desire to stand up for my work and the fear of causing a scene that would only further embarrass me. Just when I thought the humiliation couldn't get worse, Vanessa brought my painting over to the bar, set it down flat on the surface, and deliberately placed her wine glass directly on the canvas. "This is actually more useful as a coaster than wall art," she declared with a smirk, the red liquid in her glass sloshing dangerously close to the edge. The room fell into a stunned silence as the wine glass sat on my painting, a dark circle of condensation already forming on the carefully crafted surface. Time seemed to stop as I registered what was happening. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had just deliberately defaced my art in front of a room full of influential people in the art world. Some guests tittered nervously. Others looked away in secondhand embarrassment, and a few shot sympathetic glances in my direction. One woman whispered, "That's just cruel," to her companion, not quite quietly enough. I felt as if I were watching the scene from above, disconnected from my body, as hot waves of humiliation washed over me. This wasn't just about the painting anymore. This was Vanessa making a public statement about my value as both an artist and a person. The realization that this was intentional, that she had orchestrated this entire evening to put me in my place, crashed over me with stunning clarity. Every accidental slight, every interruption, every relocation of my painting had been building to this moment of ultimate degradation. I could see it in her eyes as she stared directly at me, a challenge, almost daring me to react. The familiar childhood pattern reasserted itself. If I got upset, I'd be labeled as oversensitive. If I fought back, I'd be the troublemaker ruining her perfect party. My hands trembled beneath the table as memories flooded back, years of similar moments accumulating into an unbearable weight. There was the time she'd accidentally used my portfolio sketches as scrap paper before a college interview. The Christmas she'd announced my breakup to the entire family before I'd had a chance to tell anyone. The countless times she'd interrupted me when I was talking about my work to redirect the conversation to her achievements. Each memory clicked into place, like pieces of a puzzle, revealing a lifelong pattern I'd been too desperate for her approval to acknowledge. Across the room, I caught James's eye. Unlike the others, he wasn't pretending to be engrossed in conversation or examining the ceiling fixtures. He was watching Vanessa with an expression of undisguised disapproval, his lips pressed into a thin line. When his gaze shifted to me, I saw something unexpected. Respect. Not pity, not embarrassment, but a quiet acknowledgement that seemed to say, "You deserve better than this." It was that look, from a complete stranger, that finally broke through my paralysis. I stood up carefully, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor in the quiet room. All eyes turned to me as I walked deliberately toward the bar, where Vanessa still stood triumphantly beside my defaced painting. Without a word, I removed her glass, placing it firmly on the actual coaster next to it. "I'll take that back now," I said, my voice steadier than I expected as I picked up my painting. The condensation ring had seeped into the paint, creating a dark circle in the center of my cityscape, the moisture causing some of the colors to run together. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, come on, Liv. It's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive," she said loudly, looking around for support from her guests. "Besides, it's not like anyone was going to buy it anyway." The familiar dismissal ignited something new in me, a burning anger that replaced the hurt. "That's not for you to decide anymore," I replied quietly, holding the painting carefully by its edges. Then, meeting her gaze directly, I added, "Thanks, you for the lovely evening, Vanessa. It's been incredibly illuminating." Her eyes widened slightly at my tone, so different from my usual attempts to smooth things over. Before she could respond, I turned to the room and smiled as genuinely as I could manage. "It was nice meeting all of you. Enjoy the rest of your evening." As I walked toward the door, painting in hand, Vanessa's voice followed me, higher than usual. See? This is exactly what I mean. She's always been so dramatic about her little hobby. I paused at the doorway, every instinct telling me to keep walking, to not give her the satisfaction of a response. But something had shifted inside me. A lifetime of swallowing hurt, suddenly refusing to go down. I turned back one last time. It's not a hobby, Vanessa. It's my profession. The difference is, I create things. You just buy them. Then I was out the door before I could see her reaction, my heart pounding as I waited for the elevator. The ride down was a blur, and I barely registered the sympathetic look from the doorman as I emerged onto the street, clutching my damaged painting. The cool night air hit my face, bringing with it the first tears. By the time I reached my apartment, they were flowing freely, great heaving sobs that came from some deep, wounded place I'd been ignoring for years. I placed the painting on my workbench, the water stain now fully set into the canvas, transforming my cityscape into something unrecognizable. Slumping onto my worn couch, I finally allowed myself to feel the full magnitude of what had happened. My sister had publicly humiliated me, damaged my work, and made it abundantly clear that she would never respect my chosen path. The realization was both devastating and strangely freeing. For so many years, I'd been chasing her approval, trying to make her understand the value of my art, believing that if I just created the right piece, she would finally see me. Now I could see the truth. No painting would ever be good enough, because Vanessa's issue wasn't with my art. It was with me having something that was mine alone, something she couldn't control or diminish. As I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the paintings that represented years of dedication and passion, a new question emerged through the pain. Why did I still care what Vanessa thought? When had I given her so much power over my self-worth? The digital clock on my microwave blinked 2:17 a.m. as I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, staring at the damaged painting propped against my easel. I hadn't bothered changing out of my party dress, though I'd kicked off my uncomfortable shoes hours ago. My eyes were swollen from crying, but the tears had finally stopped, replaced by a strange, hollow calmness that often follows emotional storms. The circular water stain dominated the center of my cityscape, spreading outward like ripples in a pond, blurring the careful layers of color I'd spent months perfecting. In the harsh light of my studio lamp, I could see exactly where Vanessa's wine glass had sat, the perfect ring of destruction she'd so deliberately created. I traced the outline with my finger, feeling the slightly raised texture where the moisture had warped the canvas. Why does she hate my art so much? I whispered. To the empty room, the question I'd been avoiding for years finally taking shape. It wasn't just tonight. It was a pattern stretching back to our childhood. I remembered being 7 years old, proudly showing my family the watercolor landscape I'd painted in school. While my parents made appropriate noises of appreciation, 10-year-old Vanessa had pointed out everything wrong with it. The perspective was off. The colors were unrealistic. The trees looked like green blobs. When I cried, she'd said she was just helping me improve, and our parents had agreed. Vanessa has a good eye for detail, Olivia. Listen to your sister. That was the first time, but not the last. In middle school, when I won a district art contest, Vanessa, by then in high school, had suggested the judges probably felt sorry for me. When I got accepted to art school with a partial scholarship, she'd commented that they must have needed to fill a quota. Each memory surfaced like debris after a flood, pieces of a puzzle I'd never fully assembled, because I hadn't wanted to see the complete picture. But tonight had forced me to look at it all at once. My sister didn't just dismiss my art. She actively resented it, perhaps even feared it. But why? I pulled myself off the floor and made a cup of tea, trying to think logically through the fog of emotional exhaustion. Vanessa had always been the perfect daughter. Straight A student, impeccable taste, socially adept, and eventually professionally successful. She followed all the rules, colored within all the lines, and was rewarded accordingly. I, on the other hand, had always been drawn to the messy, the emotional, the abstract. My room was chaos, my grades inconsistent, my social circle eclectic. But art had been my salvation, the one place where my different way of seeing the world was an asset. not a liability. Could it be that simple? That Vanessa resented my art because it represented a form of freedom she'd never allowed herself? Or was it that, despite her conventional success, my passion for creating had somehow threatened her? I'd never been competing with her, but perhaps she'd always been competing with me in a race I didn't even know we were running. Our parents had complicated things further. They'd praised Vanessa's practical achievements while regarding my artistic pursuits with cautious concern. "We just want you to be able to support yourself, Olivia," they'd say, as if creativity and financial stability were mutually exclusive. They'd encouraged Vanessa's criticisms under the guise of helpful feedback, unwittingly establishing a dynamic where her opinion of my work carried more weight than anyone else's, even my own. I took a sip of tea and walked slowly around my small studio, really seeing it perhaps for the first time in years. Every surface was covered with evidence of my dedication. Sketchbooks filled with ideas, canvases in various stages of completion, art books dog-eared to inspirational passages, even the collection of rejection letters I'd kept as motivation. This wasn't a hobby, this was a life's work, and I had been allowing Vanessa to define its value. The realization hit me with such force that I nearly dropped my mug. I had been looking for validation in exactly the wrong place, from the one person who had a vested interest in never providing it. What would happen if I simply stopped? If I accepted that Vanessa would never appreciate my art and that it didn't matter? The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I set down my tea and approached the damaged painting again, seeing it with new eyes. The water stain that had seemed so destructive now presented an interesting contrast to the precise cityscape beneath it. What if, instead of trying to fix or hide the damage, I incorporated it? What if I made it a feature rather than a flaw? Grabbing my brushes with sudden urgency, I began to work, adding layers around the water stain, transforming it into a central element rather than an intrusion. I worked through the night, losing myself in the process, as I hadn't in months, free from the constant internal critic that sounded suspiciously like Vanessa. As dawn broke over the city, casting a golden light through my small window, I stepped back to assess what I'd created. The painting had evolved into something entirely new, the water stain now resembling a portal or a vortex in the center of the cityscape, buildings and streets bending toward it, as if being pulled into another dimension. It was raw, emotional, imperfect, and completely authentic. For the first time since I could remember, I looked at my work without wondering what Vanessa would say about it. Instead, I asked myself a new question. What do I think of it? The answer came with surprising clarity. I loved it. It was valid, valuable, and entirely mine, whether Vanessa saw its worth or not. Exhausted, but oddly energized, I finally changed out of my party dress and fell into bed, the first rays of morning sun warming my face. My last conscious thought before sleep was a revelation that felt like both an ending and a beginning. I don't need her approval anymore. The insistent buzzing of my phone dragged me from a deep sleep. Blinking groggily at the sunlight streaming through my windows, I fumbled for the device, expecting it to be my mother calling for her weekly check-in. Instead, an unfamiliar email notification lit up the screen, the sender's name sending a jolt of recognition through my sleep-fogged brain. James Whitmore. It took me a moment to place him. Memories of last night's humiliation still raw, before I remembered the kind British gentleman from Vanessa's party. With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, I opened the email. "Dear Olivia," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. After what must have been a difficult evening, I want to apologize for not speaking up during that unfortunate incident with your painting. Please know that what happened was unconscionable and in no way a reflection on the quality of your work, which I found quite compelling. During our brief conversation, I'm actually writing with a professional interest. I should have properly introduced myself yesterday, but your sister's introductions focused on my role as her client, rather than my primary occupation. I'm the owner of Whitmore Gallery in London, specializing in emerging contemporary artists with unique perspectives. I'm in New York for just 2 more days, and would very much like to see more of your work. Would it be possible to visit your studio this morning? I understand this is short notice, and completely unexpected, but I have a strong feeling about your artistic voice. Please let me know if this would be convenient. Sincerely, James Whitmore. I read the email 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding or still dreaming. James Whitmore. The name finally clicked into place, sending another shock through my system. Whitmore Gallery was one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in London, known for launching significant careers. I'd actually researched them during my last desperate round of portfolio submissions, only to decide they were too far out of my league to bother contacting. And now the owner wanted to visit my studio? Today, I glanced frantically around my apartment, seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The unmade sofa bed, coffee mugs on every surface, laundry draped over chairs to dry, and paintings stacked haphazardly against walls. Not to mention my own appearance, which after a night of crying and painting, without sleep, must have resembled something from a horror film. My finger hovered over the reply button, as doubt crept in. Was this some elaborate prank, orchestrated by Vanessa? A cruel continuation of last night's humiliation? But how would she have access to James Whitmore's actual email account? And why would someone of his stature participate in such a scheme? Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed a quick response. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for your email. I would be honored to show you my work. My studio is also my apartment, so please excuse its modest size. Would 11 a.m. work for you? The address is... I hit send before I could second guess myself, then looked at the time. 8:47 a.m. That gave me just over 2 hours to transform both my space and myself into something presentable. What followed was a whirlwind of activity that would have impressed even Vanessa with its efficiency. I showered quickly, tamed my wild curls into something resembling a professional style, applied minimal makeup to hide the evidence of last night's tears, and put on my gallery opening outfit, a simple black dress that was the most expensive item in my wardrobe. Then I attacked the apartment, clearing away dishes, organizing my materials, carefully selecting which paintings to display prominently and which to keep in storage. I arranged my work chronologically along one wall, showing the evolution of my style, and placed the transformed water-stained painting from last night on the easel in the center of the room. Still not entirely sure if it was brilliant or terrible, but knowing it was honest. At precisely 11 a.m., a knock sounded at my door. Taking one deep breath to steady myself, I opened it to find James Whitmore, looking much as he had the night before, in an impeccably tailored suit, though his expression was far warmer than it had been in Vanessa's dining room. Olivia, thank you for accommodating me on such short notice, he said, extending his hand. I know this must seem rather unexpected. I invited him in, suddenly hyper-aware of every imperfection in my small studio apartment, from the crack in the ceiling to the worn patches on the hardwood floor. But James didn't seem to notice any of that. His attention was immediately captured by the paintings. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the wall display. At my nod, he began to examine each piece methodically, occasionally leaning in to study a particular brushstroke, or stepping back to take in the full composition. He asked thoughtful questions about my techniques, influences, and the stories behind certain images. With each response, I felt myself relaxing slightly, the conversation flowing naturally into a discussion of artistic philosophy and process. When he finally reached the transformed painting on the easel, he fell silent for a long moment. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction to the piece that now incorporated Vanessa's act of destruction. This is remarkable, he said finally, circling the easel to view it from different angles. You've transformed an act of cruelty into something powerful. The way the cityscape bends toward the central vortex suggests both destruction and creation simultaneously. It's as though the city is both being torn apart and rebuilt in a new form. His assessment was so close to what I'd felt while painting it that I was momentarily speechless. That's exactly what I was trying to express. I managed finally. The idea that damage can become a doorway to something new. James nodded, still studying the painting. May I ask about the title? I hadn't even considered naming it yet, but in that moment, it came to me with perfect clarity. Breakthrough, I said simply. A smile spread across his face. Perfect. He straightened up and turned to face me directly. Olivia, I'm going to be very straightforward with you. Your work has exactly the quality I've been looking for to round out my gallery's fall exhibition. Your use of color, your emotional expressiveness, and particularly your ability to transform perspective, as demonstrated in this latest piece, align perfectly with our gallery's direction. I believe your work would resonate strongly with our collectors. My heart began racing as James Whitmore pulled out his phone and showed me his gallery's website. Scrolling through images of a stunning space in London with high ceilings, perfect lighting, and walls displaying art that made my breath catch. We focus on artists who bring a distinct, emotional perspective to contemporary themes, he explained as he showed me previous exhibitions. What I particularly appreciate about your work is how it bridges technical skill with raw emotional honesty, something increasingly rare in today's overly conceptual art landscape. He pointed to my paintings, especially the transformed piece from last night. Your cityscapes aren't merely representations of urban environments. They're emotional landscapes, capturing the lived experience of these spaces. That's what our collectors respond to, art that makes them feel something authentic. I nodded, struggling to maintain my composure as he described my work in terms that perfectly captured what I'd been trying to achieve all these years. The contemporary art market is shifting away from sterile conceptualism toward work with genuine emotional depth, he continued. Your timing couldn't be better. There's particular interest in female artists who bring fresh perspectives to traditionally male-dominated visual conversations about urban spaces. He paused, studying my face for a moment before continuing. I'd like to make you an offer, Olivia. First, I want to purchase this piece. He gestured to Breakthrough. For my personal collection. Second, I'd like to commission a series of 6 additional works for our fall exhibition, with an option to extend to a full solo show, depending on the response. My mind was spinning so fast, I almost missed the figure when he named it. I'm prepared to offer $80,000 for this painting, with an additional $15,000 per commissioned piece. I must have misheard him. I'm sorry. Did you say $80,000? For this one painting? I asked, certain I'd gotten the decimal point wrong. James nodded, completely serious. Yes, contemporary art valuation is complex. But I'm confident this piece will appreciate significantly over time. The story behind it adds a compelling provenance, and the work itself shows remarkable technical and emotional sophistication. A sudden suspicion made me pause. Is this some kind of elaborate joke Vanessa set up? Because if it is, I couldn't even finish the sentence. The possibility too painful to articulate. James's expression softened with understanding. Olivia, I assure you this is completely legitimate. Your sister has no idea I'm here. In fact, given what I witnessed last night, I doubt she'd be pleased to know about this conversation. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, followed by his gallery's catalogue. Perhaps this will help establish my credentials. Feel free to research our gallery while I step out to make a quick call. While James stepped into the hallway, I frantically Googled Whitmore Gallery on my phone, finding numerous articles about their exhibitions, interviews with James, and features on artists whose careers had been launched through his representation. The gallery was not only legitimate, but highly respected in the international art scene. By the time he returned, I had convinced myself this was actually happening, but still couldn't quite believe it. This feels surreal, I admitted as he sat down across from me. I've been working toward gallery representation for years, and now you're offering not just that, but to buy my painting for a sum that's more money than I've made from my art in my entire career. James smiled. The art world can work that way sometimes. Years of seeming inattention, followed by sudden recognition. But make no mistake, this isn't charity or luck. It's recognition of talent and vision that has clearly been developing for years. He pulled out a contract, explaining each clause carefully, from the purchase agreement for Breakthrough to the commission terms, exhibition expectations, and gallery representation details. As I read through the paperwork, a persistent worry nagged at me. Why me, though? There are thousands of artists in New York alone. What made you notice my work specifically? James considered the question seriously. Initially, it was your conversation at the party. You spoke about your process with unusual clarity and passion. Then, when your sister... He paused, choosing his words carefully. When that unfortunate incident occurred, I observed how you handled it with dignity. But ultimately, it's the work itself. Your paintings have a distinctive voice that cuts through the noise of contemporary art trends. That's remarkably rare. His answer felt genuine, but the suspicion cultivated by years of Vanessa's manipulations died hard. Would you mind if I had someone look over the contract before signing? I asked, half expecting him to withdraw the offer at this sign of hesitation. Instead, he nodded approvingly. I'd be concerned if you didn't. Take your time, have a lawyer review it. I'm in New York until tomorrow evening. It took 3 hours, most of my emergency savings, and a frantic call to a lawyer friend of a friend. But by late afternoon, I had confirmation that the contract was not only legitimate, but unusually favorable to the artist. Shortly after 5 p.m., with hands that trembled slightly, I signed the papers. James transferred the first payment immediately, showing me the confirmation on his banking app. The moment the transaction was complete, a surreal wave of emotion washed over me. In the space of 24 hours, I had experienced the depths of humiliation and the heights of professional validation. The painting that Vanessa had casually defaced as worthless was now valued at more money than she likely spent on her entire dinner party. As James carefully wrapped Breakthrough for transport, discussing logistics for shipping the commission works once they were complete, a plan began forming in my mind. A way to reclaim not just my professional dignity, but perhaps something even more valuable, my sense of self-worth that had been eroded by decades of Vanessa's subtle and not so subtle undermining. With James gone and night falling over the city, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the bank notification on my phone. $80,000 transferred to my account. It was more money than I'd ever had at once, enough to pay off my remaining student loans, cover rent for months while I worked on the commission pieces, and even put some aside for the future. The practical implications were enormous, but it was the symbolic victory that kept bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. I called my best friend Mia, who had listened to years of stories about Vanessa's undermining, and her scream of excitement when I told her the news was so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You have to tell her, Mia insisted after I'd explained everything. This is too perfect. The universe literally handed you the most amazing comeback of all time. The thought had been circling my mind all afternoon. Should I tell Vanessa? Part of me desperately wanted to see her face when she learned that her attempt to humiliate me had backfired so spectacularly. Another part wondered if sharing the news would just be perpetuating our toxic dynamic, giving her power by showing how much I still cared about her opinion. My phone buzzed with messages from other friends as Mia spread the word, everyone offering congratulations and various creative suggestions for how to inform Vanessa about the sale. Take a video of her reaction. Wait until your exhibition and send her an invitation with the price list. Post it all over social media and tag her. Each suggestion felt increasingly vindictive, and yet I couldn't completely dismiss the desire for some form of recognition from the person who had spent a lifetime dismissing me. I need to think about this, I told Mia finally. It's not just about getting back at her. It's about what happens next. After hanging up, I wandered my apartment restlessly, emotions oscillating between elation about the opportunity and lingering hurt from Vanessa's cruelty. What did I really want from this situation? Revenge, validation, or something deeper? Like finally breaking free from the pattern that had defined our relationship for decades. Around midnight, a clarity began to emerge. What I wanted most wasn't to hurt Vanessa the way she had hurt me. It was to stop caring whether she approved of my choices, to reach a place where her opinion of my art, my career, and my life no longer held the power to devastate me. But I also didn't want to pretend the sale hadn't happened, or that her actions hadn't directly led to this turning point in my career. There was a poetic justice to it all that felt too significant to ignore. The idea came to me as I was looking at the receipt James had provided for tax purposes, a simple document confirming the sale of Breakthrough for $80,000 to James Whitmore of Whitmore Gallery, London. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a factual record of a professional transaction. And suddenly I knew exactly what to do. The next morning, I visited a framing shop in Chelsea. One I'd walked past countless times, but never entered due to its obvious expense. I handed over the receipt to be professionally framed in a simple black frame with archival matting. It's a gift, I explained to the puzzled clerk. A very special one. While waiting for the framing to be completed, I drafted and redrafted a brief note to accompany it. My first attempts were too emotional, too bitter, or too smug. Eventually, I settled on something simple. Vanessa, I wanted to share this professional milestone with you. The painting from your party found its perfect home. Thank you for being part of this breakthrough moment in my career. Olivia. No sarcasm, no obvious dig, just a straightforward acknowledgement of what had happened. The framed receipt was ready. By afternoon, an elegant presentation of what might otherwise be a mundane document. As I carefully packaged it for mailing, I considered my options one last time. I could deliver it in person, ensuring I'd see her reaction. But that felt too confrontational, too much like I was seeking a specific response. I could include more details about James and the gallery, but that might seem like I was trying too hard to impress her. In the end, I decided the simplest approach was the most powerful. The receipt spoke for itself. A clear factual statement that needed no embellishment. At the post office, I hesitated one final time before dropping the package into the mail slot. Was I perpetuating our unhealthy dynamic by seeking any reaction at all? Or was this a necessary step in changing that dynamic forever? I couldn't be sure, but it felt right to acknowledge what had happened, rather than pretending it hadn't affected me. The package slid from my fingers into the mail slot with a soft thud that felt surprisingly final. Whatever Vanessa's reaction might be, I had acted authentically, neither seeking revenge nor pretending the hurt hadn't occurred. I walked back to my apartment, feeling lighter than I had in years, as though I'd put down a heavy burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For the first time in my adult life, I had acted toward Vanessa, not as her perpetually seeking approval little sister, but as a professional artist, acknowledging a colleague who had inadvertently played a role in an important career development. Whether she would recognize or appreciate that shift didn't matter nearly as much as the fact that I felt it myself. As I unlocked my apartment door, my phone buzzed with an email from James, with initial thoughts about the commissioned pieces and exhibition planning. My new life was already beginning, with or without Vanessa's approval, and for the first time, that felt completely okay. 1 month passed in a blur of creativity and transformation. My small apartment, once cluttered with uncertainty, now hummed with purposeful energy, as I worked on the commissioned pieces for Whitmore Gallery. The first 3 paintings were already complete, each one building on the emotional breakthrough of that pivotal night. James had been enthusiastic about my progress. Our weekly video calls, filled with thoughtful discussion about artistic direction and exhibition planning. My flight to London for the opening was booked for the following month, a reality that still occasionally struck me as surreal. Vanessa had not responded to the framed receipt. No call, no text, no email acknowledging its arrival or contents. At first, I'd checked my phone compulsively, both dreading and anticipating her reaction. But as days turned into weeks with no response, something unexpected happened. I stopped waiting. The silence that once would have devastated me as confirmation of her indifference now felt strangely liberating. Whether she was too shocked, too angry, or too embarrassed to respond didn't matter nearly as much as the fact that her non-response no longer defined my emotional state. I was in the middle of working on the 4th commissioned piece when a knock at my door broke my concentration. Expecting the delivery of new supplies, I opened it without checking, only to find myself face to face with my parents. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely surprised. They lived in Connecticut and rarely visited the city without advance planning. My father shifted uncomfortably, while my mother stepped forward with determination in her eyes. "We need to talk, Olivia. May we come in?" Their demeanor was unusual, serious in a way that made me instantly anxious. Had something happened? Was someone ill? I ushered them inside, quickly clearing sketchbooks from the sofa to make space for them to sit. My mother's eyes immediately went to the large canvas on my easel, her expression unreadable. "Your work has changed," she observed quietly. "It's more confident." The unexpected compliment momentarily threw me. "Thank you," I replied cautiously. "It's part of a commissioned series for a gallery in London." My father cleared his throat. "That's actually why we're here, Liv. We spoke with Vanessa yesterday." My stomach tightened instinctively at the mention of my sister's name. So the receipt had made an impact, after all. "What did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. My parents exchanged glances before my mother answered. "Not much, honestly. She mentioned you'd sold a painting for a significant sum and would be showing your work internationally. She seemed upset." The understatement almost made me laugh. Upset how? Angry that I succeeded. Disappointed her plan to humiliate me backfired. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Years of accumulated hurt suddenly finding voice. My father leaned forward, his expression serious. "Olivia, what happened between you two?" Vanessa wouldn't give us details, but something clearly went very wrong. For a moment, I considered downplaying the incident, falling back into my familiar role as peacekeeper. Instead, I told them everything. From the initial hope I'd felt bringing my painting to Vanessa's party, to the deliberate public humiliation, and the unexpected opportunity that followed. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked remarkably like shame. When I finished, the silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken recognition. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. "We had no idea things had gotten so bad between you two. We knew you had your differences. But this..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "We failed you both, didn't we?" The question caught me by surprise. In all my reflections on my relationship with Vanessa, I'd never expected our parents to acknowledge their role in it. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. My father sighed deeply. "We always thought we were being supportive of both of you in different ways. Vanessa seemed to need structure, validation for following the expected path. You were always so independent, so determined to follow your own vision, regardless of what anyone thought. We pushed Vanessa to achieve conventionally, because that seemed to be what she wanted, and we pushed you to be more practical, because we worried about your future." He gestured around my apartment turned studio. "But we never really saw that we were creating this competition between you. This idea that one path was somehow more valuable than the other." My mother reached for my hand, her eyes filling with tears. "When we saw that receipt, when we realized that you'd achieved exactly what you'd always said you would, it made us question everything we thought we knew. We're so proud of you, Olivia. And we're sorry we didn't show that more clearly all along." The conversation that followed was long and often difficult, unpacking decades of family dynamics, misunderstandings, and unintended consequences. For the first time, I heard how my parents had admired my determination while fearing for my stability, how they'd pushed Vanessa toward conventional success while secretly wondering if she was truly happy, how they'd never realized the extent to which their different approaches to parenting, each of us had fostered resentment rather than sisterly support. By the time they left, something had shifted between us. A new understanding that felt raw but honest. They promised to talk to Vanessa, not to force reconciliation, but to address the patterns that had brought us to this point. Whether that would make any difference remained to be seen, but it no longer felt like the most important thing. The following weeks brought more changes. I rented a proper studio space with part of my earnings, giving myself room to work on larger canvases. I hired an assistant to help with the logistical aspects of preparing for the exhibition. I reconnected with artist friends I'd drifted away from during my years of financial struggle, finding community in shared experiences and mutual support. 2 days before my scheduled flight to London, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was an invitation to a small gallery, opening in Chelsea the following evening. No note, no explanation, just the invitation with my name handwritten on the envelope. I recognized Vanessa's distinctive script immediately. I stood in my new studio, turning the invitation over in my hands, uncertain what it meant or how to respond. Was it an olive branch, a professional courtesy, or something else entirely? After much deliberation, I decided to attend, not with expectations of reconciliation or vindication, but with openness to whatever might unfold. The gallery was small but elegant, showcasing an exhibition of emerging interior designers. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, immaculate as always in a designer dress, surrounded by admirers. Our eyes met across the space, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then, to my surprise, she excused herself from her group and walked directly toward me. "You came," she said simply, her voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't sure you would." I nodded, equally cautious. "Thank you for the invitation." An awkward silence fell between us. Years of complicated history, making small talk impossible. Finally, Vanessa spoke again. Her words clearly rehearsed, but sincere nonetheless. "I've been thinking about what to say to you for weeks. I'm sorry. Seems insufficient for what happened at my party. It was cruel and deliberately hurtful. I can't undo it, but I can acknowledge it was wrong." The admission was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. When I finally found my voice, I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. "Why, Vanessa? Why has it always been so important to diminish what I do?" She looked away, visibly struggling with her answer. "Because you were always free in a way I never allowed myself to be," she said finally. "You followed your passion regardless of what anyone thought, while I built my entire life around others' expectations. When you succeeded on your own terms, it made me question every choice I'd made." The honesty of her answer disarmed me completely. This wasn't a full reconciliation, and one conversation couldn't heal decades of hurt on both sides, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of truths too long denied. Whether we would ever rebuild a true sisterly relationship remained uncertain, but for the first time, it seemed possible that we might eventually find a new way to relate to each other as adults, separate but connected by shared history and newfound understanding. As I stood in the crowded gallery of my sister's professional world, preparing to depart for my own artistic debut across the ocean, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From the humiliation of having my art used as a coaster, to the triumph of international recognition, from the painful patterns of familial dysfunction, to the first tentative steps toward healing, each moment had contributed to a transformation deeper than just professional success. I had discovered something essential about myself, that my value as an artist and as a person had never depended on Vanessa's approval, or my parents' understanding, or even market validation. It had always been there, in the quiet certainty that kept me painting through years of rejection and doubt. The true breakthrough hadn't been selling a painting for $80,000. Thrilling as that was, it had been breaking free from the need for external validation, especially from those least likely to provide it. As I prepared to step into this new chapter of my life, I carried with me not just the lessons of resilience and persistence, but also a deeper understanding of forgiveness, not as a gift to those who had hurt me, but as a liberation for myself. The painting that now hung in James Whitmore's London home would always bear the mark of Vanessa's wine glass, transformed into an integral part of the composition. Similarly, our family history would always bear the imprints of past wounds, but perhaps, like the painting, those marks could become part of a new and more authentic creation. Have you ever had someone close to you try to diminish something you were passionate about? How did you handle it? And did it ultimately change your relationship with that person, or with your passion itself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content about navigating difficult relationships and finding your authentic path despite others' expectations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes our greatest breakthroughs come disguised as our most painful setbacks.